The girl stood in the falling snow like she'd been waiting there her whole life. Boots too big, baby bundled against her chest. Eyes that didn't beg. Jacob Sterling stopped on the boardwalk outside Morrison's general store, 3 sacks of flour balanced under one arm, and felt the December wind cut through Blackwater's Main Street like a blade through worn leather. The snow was falling thick, the kind that buried things. She was maybe 11, thin as a fence rail. The baby in her arms was wrapped in a horse blanket, steam rising from its mouth with each breath. Her boots, men's boots too big by half and stuffed with soaked newspaper, left prints in the snow that looked like wounds. She watched him watching her. Jacob saw calculation in those eyes, measuring him the way a prospector measures ore. He was dressed well, buffalo coat that cost $45, Italian boots 30 more, gold Waltham watch worth 150. She would know wealth when she saw it. Children on the edge learned which doors might open. "Can you buy us, mister?" Her voice was flat as hammered tin. No hope in it, no fear either. Just a transaction offered like she was selling eggs or firewood. The words hit Jacob harder than the cold. In 48 years of living, no one had ever asked him that question. Jacob didn't answer. His jaw worked once, twice. He turned and walked toward his wagon, the Sterling Ranch brand burned deep into the wood. He didn't look back. She didn't call after him. The snow kept falling, filling in his boot prints as fast as he made them. 20 paces, 30. The flour sacks were heavy on his shoulder, 200 pounds of provision for 500 head of cattle. The wind screamed, and somewhere behind him, a baby cried once, then went quiet with practiced silence. Jacob stopped. He stood there in the street, snow catching in his beard, one hand gripping the wagon gate. He didn't turn around. His breath came white and ragged. 12 years since Sarah. 12 years since the nursery door closed. 12 years of telling himself he was better off alone, protected by wealth and isolation. The wind howled. He turned around. He told himself he turned because of the weather, because no child should be left standing in a storm. But as he walked back, boots crunching through fresh powder, he knew he was lying. He turned because something in that hopeless voice had cracked open a door he'd spent 12 years keeping sealed. She hadn't moved, hadn't shifted her weight, hadn't pulled the baby closer, hadn't done anything a child ought to do when a grown man walks away. She just watched him come back with those measuring eyes that had stopped expecting anything good. Jacob stopped 3 feet from her, close enough to see the blue tinge at her lips, close enough to see the baby breathing in shallow puffs. The child was maybe 10 months old, face pale but peaceful, wrapped in that rough blanket. "Where's your people?" "Ain't got none." "Your mama?" "Dead." "Daddy too." She said it the way someone might say Tuesday or potatoes. "Trail fever took mama. Daddy went for help." A pause. He ain't coming back. Jacob looked at the sky, clouds the color of iron, pressing down low and mean. Another hour, maybe 2, and the road to his ranch would be impassable. He thought about the empty house waiting 8 miles out of town, the silence in it so complete you could hear your heartbeat in every room. He thought about the door at the end of the upstairs hall that he hadn't opened in 12 years. "You got a name?" "Bird." "That your brother?" She nodded once. "He got a name?" "River." Something flickered in her face, almost a challenge. "Mama liked birds." Jacob grunted. His breath came out in a white plume the wind snatched away. Behind him his horses stamped and snorted, coats frosting white. "Storm's coming, bad one." "I know, you'll freeze out here." "I know that too." He waited for her to ask, to beg. She didn't. She just stood there in her dead man's boots, holding her brother like he was the last real thing in the world, and waited for Jacob to make his choice. "Damn it all to hell. You're coming with me." He turned toward the wagon already moving. "Just till the weather clears. That's all." He heard her boots crunch in the snow behind him. 1 step, 2, then she stopped. "What do you want for it?" He turned. "What?" "Roof, fire, food." She listed them like items on an invoice. "What do you want in trade?" "I can work, don't eat much, baby neither." "We don't make trouble." Jacob stared at her, 11 years old, offering herself like hired help, negotiating terms like a lawyer. "I don't want nothing." She didn't believe him. Her shoulders stayed tight, eyes tracking him. But she followed because What choice did she have when the alternative was freezing in the street? He lifted her onto the wagon seat and she weighed nothing, maybe 70 pounds. She arranged herself at the far edge, as far from him as the narrow seat allowed, and tucked River inside her coat. The infant stirred once, made a sound like a kitten, then went still with that unnatural quiet. He all right? He's hungry, but he's all right. Jacob clicked his tongue and the horses leaned into their harness. The wagon wheels groaned against fresh snow. They rolled forward, leaving town behind, heading into open country where the wind had nothing to stop it. The road wound through empty grazing land, past frozen creek beds and skeletal cottonwoods bent by wind. Snow came harder, cutting visibility to 30 yards, then 20. Jacob kept his eyes forward, navigating by memory. Beside him, the girl didn't shiver or complain. She just held her brother and watched the white world slide past. Twice Jacob caught himself looking at her boots. Men's boots, good leather once, but now cracked and salt-stained. The left one had been patched with saddle stitching, professional work, 2 sizes too big at least. She'd stuffed them with newspaper, but the paper was soaked through and he could see her toes moving inside, flexing to keep blood flowing. He didn't ask where she got them. She didn't offer. But Jacob knew boots like that didn't just appear. Someone had worn them before her, someone bigger, someone who wasn't wearing them anymore. The Sterling Ranch appeared through the snow like a ghost. Dark fieldstone walls, steep roof, smoke rising from the banked fire. Substantial house, 2 stories with wraparound porch, the kind that announced wealth without shouting it. 12,000 acres surrounding it, 500 head of prime cattle, water rights worth more than gold. Everything a man could want except the one thing that mattered. The girl looked at the house, the barn, the cottonwood tree on the eastern rise with bare branches reaching up like fingers. Her face gave nothing away. "Big," she said, "big enough." He reached up to help her down, but she was already moving, swinging her legs over and landing in snow with River still secure. She moved like she'd learned not to accept help, like hands reaching toward you usually wanted something back. Inside, the house was warm and dark. Jacob lit a lamp and shadows jumped back into corners. The girl stood in the doorway, snow melting off her coat, her eyes measuring. Counting exits, he realized. Looking for doors, windows, ways out. "There's a room upstairs, end of the hall. Clean sheets. Stove in the corner if you want heat." "What about that one?" She was looking at the door halfway down the hall on the left, the one that was always closed. "Storage." Jacob felt the lie stick in his throat. "Ain't nothing in there you need to worry about." She knew he was lying. He could see it in how her eyes stayed on that door a half second too long. But she didn't push. "The room upstairs. You and the boy can have it long as you're here." "And how long is that?" "Till the storm clears. Day or 2, then we'll figure something out." She nodded slowly, adjusted River on her hip, started for the stairs. Halfway up, she stopped without turning. "I ain't asking for charity. Whatever you want us to do, we'll do it. I can cook some. Clean. Tend animals. Just stay warm. That's all I'm asking." She didn't believe him. He could tell by her shoulders. But she went up anyway. He heard the bedroom door close, heard the lock click into place from inside. Jacob stood in the empty hall for a long moment, listening to the wind moan around corners, listening to silence that had been his only companion for 12 years. Somewhere upstairs, the baby made a small sound, not crying, just existing. He looked at the closed door halfway down the hall. The nursery, Sarah's room, Emma's room. 12 years of dust coating the cradle he'd carved. The rocking chair where Sarah had planned to nurse their daughter. The small clothes she'd sewn with such hope. All of it frozen in time, sealed and untouched. Jacob turned away and went to bank the fire. She counted the exits before she counted the furniture. Old habit, the room was bigger than any place she'd slept in 2 years. A real bed with a real mattress, not straw or bare boards. A window facing east with frost crawling up the glass. A small iron stove in the corner, laid with kindling but not lit. Clean sheets on the bed, a quilt folded at the foot in blue and white squares, hand-stitched by someone who knew their craft. The kind of thing somebody's mother made. Bird stood in the doorway with River heavy against her chest and waited for the catch. There was always a catch. Rich men didn't bring street children home out of kindness. The nicer they seemed at first, the worse the payment usually was. She crossed to the window and looked out. Snow still falling, erasing the world. She could see the barn and beyond it that cottonwood tree on the rise, leafless and stark like black lightning. Something about that tree pulled at her, made her uneasy. River stirred, made his hungry sound. Bird whispered, I know, soon, even though she didn't know when soon would be. The last stolen milk was gone. She didn't light the stove or pull back the quilt. Instead, she lowered herself to the floor in the corner farthest from the door, back against the wall, and opened her coat to let River nurse from the empty bottle. He sucked anyway, too young to understand the comfort was hollow. She slept sitting up with River tucked inside her coat. Every time the house creaked or wind gusted, her eyes snapped open, checking door, window, checking River was still breathing. Sometime deep in the night, she heard footsteps in the hall, slow, measured. They stopped right outside her room. She could see boot shadows in the gap beneath the door, backlit by lamplight. Her hand found the knife she'd stolen 3 weeks back, fingers closing around the handle. The doorknob didn't turn. The shadow stood there for a minute, maybe less. Then the footsteps moved away and the light faded. Bird didn't sleep again after that. Morning came gray and cold. She woke to the smell of coffee and something frying, bacon or salt pork, rich, fatty smell that made her stomach clench. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten anything hot. River was still asleep. She eased him onto the folded quilt and unlocked the door quietly, slipped into the hall. The house was different in daylight, bigger, cleaner than she'd expected. No dust on banisters, no cobwebs. Someone kept this place up. There were pictures on the walls going down the stairs, a landscape of mountains, a drawing of horses, and there, in a gilt frame, a photograph. A woman young and pretty with dark hair pinned up, high-collared dress, face serious but not grim. Something soft in her expression, something waiting and hopeful. Bird stopped and looked at that face. This was her, the wife, Sarah, the one who died giving birth to a baby who died 3 days later. She looked at the closed door halfway down the hall. Storage, he'd said. The lie had been obvious. Bird filed it away and kept moving. The kitchen was warm. The big iron stove threw heat into every corner. Jacob sat at the table with his back to the door, coffee steaming beside his plate. He didn't turn when she came in, but his shoulders shifted. There's food on the stove. Help yourself. Cast iron skillet of bacon. Pot of oatmeal. Basket of biscuits covered with cloth. More food than Bird had seen in months. She didn't move. It ain't charity, Jacob said without turning. You're stuck here till the storm breaks. Might as well eat. Bird approached the stove like it might bite. Took a plate, served herself one biscuit, one strip of bacon, a spoonful of oatmeal. The bare minimum. She sat at the far end of the table and ate in small bites, slowly, tasting every grain of salt. Her hands shook slightly, and she pressed them flat against wood between bites. Jacob finished his coffee and stood. He crossed to the window and looked out at snow still falling. Storm's going to last another day at least, maybe 2. I've figured. You need anything for the baby, you tell me. There's milk in the spring house, fresh from yesterday, blankets in the cedar chest upstairs. All right. He turned then, just enough to look at her over his shoulder. You going to eat more than that? She looked down at her plate. Half the biscuit left, 2 bites of oatmeal. I ain't that hungry. They both knew it was a lie, but he didn't push, just nodded once. I got work in the barn. Be out there most of the morning. You don't have to stay in that room. House is yours to move around in. He paused. Just don't go in the door, down the hall. The closed one. Storage, she said, throwing his lie back flat and neutral. That's right. He pulled on his buffalo coat and hat and went out into the snow. Bird watched him through the window, a dark shape moving toward the barn, disappearing into white. She looked at the food still warming on the stove, looked at the closed door down the hall, looked at her empty plate. Then she got up and started clearing dishes. 2 hours later, when he came back, the kitchen was cleaner than it had been in months. Bird had scrubbed plates and skillet, wiped down the table, swept the floor, stacked fresh kindling by the stove. She'd found a broom in the pantry and a rag under the sink and worked without stopping. River was propped in a basket she'd lined with a dish towel, watching with solemn eyes. Jacob stood in the doorway looking at what she'd done. You didn't have to do that. I know. She wrung out the rag over the sink, not looking at him. Need to, though. He opened his mouth like he was going to argue, then closed it and nodded slowly. Baby doing all right? He's fine. Found the milk like you said. He took a good feed. Good. Silence stretched between them. Not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. Outside, the wind had died some. Still snowing, but gentler now, flakes falling straight. Jacob crossed to the counter, where she'd stacked the clean plates. He picked one up, turned it over like checking her work, then set it down and looked at her. Really looked for the first time. How old are you? 12. The lie came easy because she'd been telling it for months. 12. Something moved in his face, shadow there and gone. That's too young to be alone. I ain't alone. I got River. He didn't answer, just stood there looking at her like she was a problem he didn't know how to solve. In the basket, River made a sound. Not quite a cry, something softer, almost a laugh. Those small noises babies make when they're testing their voices. They both turned to look at him. The baby was waving his tiny fist at nothing, face scrunched in concentration. Something happened to Jacob's face then, just for a second, like a door cracking open and light leaking through. Then it closed again, and he turned away. Storm will break by tomorrow, day after at the latest. We'll figure things out then. He walked out without looking back, and she heard his boots on the stairs, heard a door close above. Bird stood alone with the clean dishes and the baby. She looked down at River, still waving his fists, oblivious to tension and grief. Don't get comfortable, she whispered. We ain't staying. But even as she said it, she could feel the warmth at her back, the fullness in her belly, the way her body was starting to relax in increments so small she almost didn't notice. She picked up the broom and went back to sweeping. That afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Bird froze mid-step on the stairs, River in her arms. Below, she heard Jacob's boots cross the floor, heard the door creak open. Ruth, his voice was flat. Storm ain't stopped you, I see. Storm never stopped me, yet, Jacob Sterling, and you know it. A woman's voice, warm and sharp at the same time. I brought some things, figured you might need. Silence. Then the woman's warmth drained away, replaced by something careful. Jacob, who's that on your stairs? Bird came down slowly, one step at a time. The woman in the doorway was maybe 60, broad-shouldered, gray hair pulled back tight, face that looked like it had seen everything twice and forgiven half of it. She was holding a basket covered with checkered cloth. This is Bird, Jacob said, and her brother River. They're staying till the storm passes. Ruth didn't say anything for a long moment. She looked at Bird, looked at the baby, looked at the way Bird held him. Then she looked at Jacob, and something passed between them. Bird couldn't read. Well, Ruth stepped inside and set the basket on the table. I brought extra just in case. Bread, some preserves, bit of ham. She looked at Bird again, and her voice softened. You hungry, child? Bird didn't answer. Ruth turned to Jacob. Sarah would have liked her. The name hit the room like a stone dropped in still water. Jacob's whole body went rigid. Don't, Jacob. Don't, Ruth. Ruth pressed her lips together, nodded once. She looked at Bird with something that might have been pity or understanding. You need anything, she said. You send for me. Morrison's General Store. Anyone in town can point you. Then she was gone, leaving nothing behind but the basket and the name hanging in the air like smoke. Bird stood at the bottom of the stairs, River quiet against her chest. Jacob hadn't moved. He was staring at the door Ruth had closed, hands clenched at his sides. Who's Sarah? He flinched like she'd struck him. Nobody. She's nobody. He walked past her without another word and disappeared into the back of the house. A moment later, she heard a door close. Not the forbidden one. His bedroom, maybe. Bird looked at the basket Ruth had left, looked at the photograph on the wall, the young woman with the soft face and waiting eyes. Sarah. She filed the name away with the locked door and the way his face had cracked when River laughed. Then she went to see what was in the basket. Morning of the second day, Bird woke to find a package outside her door. Brown paper wrapping, no note. Inside, boots. Brown leather, good quality, her exact size. She stared at them for a long moment, then tried them on. Perfect fit. How did he know her size? Then she remembered the footprints in the hall dust. He'd measured them somehow, had ridden to town in the storm, had come back. Why would he do that? She came downstairs in the new boots. Jacob was at the table, coffee steaming. They made eye contact. Neither spoke. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once. First bridge of trust built. The days took on a rhythm. She woke before dawn, fed River, came downstairs to find coffee already made and food warming. She ate more now than that first morning, though still less than he put out. Then she worked. Swept floors, beat rugs, scrubbed pots, fed the chickens in the small coop behind the house. Jacob didn't tell her to do any of it, didn't thank her either. But she caught him noticing. He taught her things. How to bank a fire properly, how to groom a horse, how to hold a rifle safely even if she didn't shoot it yet. Practical skills, taught with few words, just demonstration and patient correction when she got it wrong. She learned he was a man of silences. He didn't fill air with talk just to hear himself speak. When he said something, it mattered. When he taught her something, it was because she needed to know it. On the third morning, he asked about her mother. They were sitting at the kitchen table, him with coffee, her with milk. The question came out of nowhere, dropped into silence like a stone into a well. What was she like, your mama? Bird wrapped both hands around her cup, felt warmth seep into her palms. On the floor beside her, River was asleep in his basket. She sang, all the time, old songs from her grandmother's grandmother. She paused. She had a voice like something you'd want to follow, even if it was leading you somewhere bad. Sounds like he loved her. He did. The word came out flat, hard. For a while. She didn't explain what happened after. The drinking, the debts, the way love could curdle into something that smelled like whiskey and tasted like fear. Jacob didn't ask. He just sat there with his coffee going cold, looking at her with eyes that saw too much. The trail fever, he said. When she passed, you were alone. Had the baby. Had River and had these. She pointed at her own two hands. That's all anyone's got in the end. What they can do and who they got to do it for. Something moved in Jacob's face. How long you been on your own? Since she died? 7 months, maybe 8. She'd lost track somewhere in there, days blurring into a long smear of cold and hunger, and putting one foot in front of the other because stopping meant dying. Nebraska to Wyoming, Jacob said. That's a long walk, didn't have much choice. No, I don't suppose you did. Silence settled over them again, but different now, softer. River stirred in his basket, made a small sound, then settled. Jacob's eyes went to him. That flicker again, walls coming down brick by brick. He's a good baby. Hardly cries. He learned not to. Bird's voice was matter of fact. Crying draws attention. Attention ain't always good. Jacob flinched slightly. How old is he? 10 months? 11 next week. She looked down at her brother's sleeping face. He won't remember none of this. The trail, the cold. Mama. Her throat tightened. That's good, I think. Better not to remember, maybe. Jacob's voice was rough. Or maybe remembering is the only way to hold on to what mattered. Bird looked up at him. For a moment, neither spoke. You're thinking about her, Bird said. The woman in the photograph. Sarah. His whole body went still. Ruth said her name. And you look like I hit you with a shovel. That ain't your concern. I know. She held his gaze. But you asked about my mama. Seems only fair. Jacob sat very still for a long time. The fire crackled. The wind had picked up outside, rattling windows. But inside the kitchen, it was warm. She was my wife. His voice was quiet, stripped of everything but the words. Sarah, 12 years ago, she died having our baby. A girl. Little thing no bigger than your brother there. He paused. Baby lived 3 days, then she went too. I'm sorry, don't be. The words came out harsh, automatic. Then he shook his head. No, that ain't right. I don't mean it like that. I just mean people say sorry and it don't change nothing. Don't bring them back, no. Bird's voice was quiet. It don't. They looked at each other across the table. A man who'd lost everything 12 years ago, and a girl who'd never had anything to lose except a brother and a pair of dead man's boots. 2 different kinds of alone. 2 different kinds of surviving. The door, Bird said. The one you said was storage. Jacob's jaw tightened. That's where they were. The nursery. He didn't answer. But he didn't deny it either. You ain't been in there since, no. Why? Wait, because he stopped. His voice cracked on the word and he looked away toward the dark window. Because if I open that door, they're really gone. Long as it stays closed, there's still a piece of it that's alive. Bird thought about that, thought about her mother's voice, the songs she used to sing, the way birds sometimes woke up in the middle of the night still hearing them. That ain't how it works, her voice was soft. Keeping a door closed don't keep nobody alive. It just keeps you locked out of your own house. Jacob turned back to her. His eyes were wet, though no tears fell. You're 11 years old. What the hell do you know about it? 12? She corrected. And I know because I tried it after Mama died. I kept her shawl in my pack and wouldn't open the pack because if I didn't look at it, maybe she wasn't really gone. She paused. Then the shawl got stolen and she was still gone. And I didn't even have the shawl anymore. Jacob stared at her. So that's what I know. Holding on to closed doors don't bring back the dead. It just makes sure you can't use the room. She pushed back from the table and stood, picked up River's basket. Jacob, she said, and he looked up at her. Thank you for telling me about your mama. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. She stood there for a moment, her back to him. Every winter's hard, she said, but they end. Then she went upstairs and left him alone with his cold coffee and his closed door and the snow falling silent outside. On the morning of the 7th day, the storm finally broke. Bird woke to sunlight, actual sunlight, streaming through the frost on her window. She went to the glass and looked out. The world was white and still and bright enough to hurt your eyes. She heard Jacob downstairs, moving around the kitchen, heard the clink of dishes, the scrape of a chair. Normal sounds, safe sounds. She dressed River in the warmest clothes they had and carried him down. Jacob was at the table with the newspaper he'd retrieved from town yesterday before the roads closed again. Storm's done, he said without looking up. Road'll be clear by afternoon. Bird's stomach clenched. So we're leaving. He looked up then. That's up to you. What do you mean? I mean, you can go if you want, or you can stay, long as you need. She stared at him. Why would you let us stay? Because you need a place and I got one. Because River needs warm and food and safety. Because. He stopped, set down the paper. Because I had a daughter once and I couldn't save her. But I can help you, if you'll let me. Bird didn't know what to say. She'd been preparing herself all week for this moment, for being sent away, for being back on the road with nowhere to go and winter still fierce. She hadn't prepared for this. What do you want in return? Nothing. There's always something, not this time. She looked at him, trying to see the trap, the catch, the price that hadn't been named yet. But all she saw was a man who'd been alone too long, who'd locked too many doors, who was maybe just as scared as she was of what it might mean to open them again. River made a sound, not crying, just existing, letting the world know he was still here. Jacob's eyes went to him, and something shifted in his expression, ice beginning to thaw. Can I think about it? Bird asked. Take all the time you need. She spent the morning cleaning, working, keeping her hands busy while her mind spun in circles. Stay or go, safety or freedom, debt or independence, trust or survival. At noon, Jacob came in from the barn and found her in the kitchen. I got something for you, he said, if you're interested. He held out a book, small, simple, with large text and pictures. A primer for learning to read. Can't pay you for teaching, she said automatically. Didn't ask you to pay. Then what do you want? I want you to learn to read. That's all, no debt, no obligation, just a skill that might help you someday. Why would you do that? Because I had a daughter once. She would have been about your age if she'd lived. And Sarah, my wife, she would have wanted me to help if I could. Bird took the book, opened it to the first page. The cat sat on the mat. She could read that, could sound it out at least. She looked up at Jacob. If we stay, it's just till we figure things out. Till spring, maybe. That's fine. And I work. I earn my keep. We ain't charity, you ain't charity, you're family, if you'll have it. The word hung in the air between them. Family. Bird turned it over in her mind, testing it, looking for the sharp edges, the places it might cut. Okay, she said finally. We'll stay. For now. Jacob nodded once. Good. That afternoon, Bird sat in the parlor with River in her lap and practiced reading. Simple sentences about cats and mats and boys and balls. Jacob sat in the big chair by the window with his own book, reading while she read, both of them quiet in the warm house, while outside the world sparkled white and new. On Sunday, Jacob took them to church, his first attendance in 12 years. Bird was nervous, people would stare, but the congregation was kind. Mrs. Patterson brought cookies. Pastor Webb welcomed them warmly, calling them by name. At Sunday school, the teacher asked if Bird knew any hymns. She didn't, but she sang one of her mother's songs instead. In Cantonese, the lullaby Rose used to sing. The room went silent. When she finished, the teacher was crying. "What does it mean?" she asked. Bird looked at Jacob, then back at the teacher. "It means you are loved. You are safe. You are home." Monday, Jacob enrolled her in Blackwater School. She was behind her age, but catching up fast. Smart, motivated, hungry for learning. A girl named Emma befriended her at lunch. First friend in years. The days became weeks. Winter settled in deep, but inside the Sterling house, there was warmth. Bird learned to read better, learned numbers, learned about the ranch and cattle and business. Jacob taught her to ride, to shoot, to think about the future instead of just surviving the present. River took his first steps holding on to Jacob's hands. Started calling Bird something that sounded like B. Started calling Jacob Pa, copying his sister. And slowly, so slowly Bird almost didn't notice, the closed door at the end of the hall stopped being quite so tightly shut. Light showed under it sometimes. She heard Jacob in there once, late at night, talking to someone who wasn't there. The door was opening. Just a crack. But it was opening. And Bird, who had walked 500 miles in boots that didn't fit, who had killed to survive, who had learned not to trust or hope or believe in anything permanent, found herself thinking, maybe, just maybe, she'd finally walked far enough. Maybe this was home. The coffee was still warm in Bird's hands when she heard the wagons. Two of them coming up the road fast, horses pushing through snow that had started melting in the weeks since the storm broke. She was at the kitchen table with Jacob, morning light streaming through the windows, River playing on a blanket on the floor with wooden blocks Jacob had carved. She saw Jacob's face change before she heard the sound. That subtle shift, the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes went to the rifle over the door before coming back to her. "Stay inside," he said quietly. "No matter what. Who is it?" He stood, crossed to the window. His whole body went rigid. Horace Drummond. Bird felt ice flood her veins. She'd heard that name in town, heard women whisper it with a mixture of respect and fear. Richest man in the valley after Jacob. Owned the bank, ran the town council. What does he want? Jacob didn't answer. He was already moving toward the door, pulling on his coat. Bird scooped up River and back toward the stairs, watching through the kitchen doorway as Jacob stepped out onto the porch. Through the window, she could see them now. Two wagons. One was fine, black carriage with brass fittings, matched bay horses that probably cost $800. The other was rougher, a working wagon. 3 men total. The one in the fine carriage was tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than most men made in 6 months. Horace Drummond. The other two, the sheriff, looking tired and reluctant, and a third man staying back, face shadowed by his hat. "Mr. Sterling." Drummond's voice carried through the cold air, smooth as butter. "Fine morning, isn't it? What do you want, Horace?" "Just a friendly visit. Some concerns have been raised about your house guests." Bird's heart hammered against her ribs. She backed further into the shadows where they couldn't see her from outside, but she could still watch. "My guests ain't your concern." "Ah, but they are. You see, there's been some trouble down south. A man found dead near Horse Creek, Nebraska. Throat cut, belongings stolen. Bird couldn't breathe, couldn't move. River squirmed in her arms and she held him tighter. Too tight, and he made a small sound of protest. "That got nothing to do with me," Jacob said. "Perhaps not, but it has everything to do with the child you're harboring. The sheriff here has some questions." The sheriff stepped forward, pulled out a wanted poster. Bird couldn't see it from where she stood, but she knew what it said. "Virgil Hatch, wanted for child trafficking, $500 reward, found dead October 31st. His boots were taken," the sheriff said. He sounded apologetic, like he didn't want to be here. Distinctive boots, Anderson & Sons, custom made in Omaha, size 10, with a saddle stitch patch on the left one. Bird looked down at her feet, at the new boots Jacob had given her, at the old ones she'd left upstairs, hidden in the back of the wardrobe because she couldn't throw them away even though she knew she should. Those boots showed up on a child, Sheriff continued. Child traveling with an infant. Same description as the girl you have taken in. Drummond smiled. It was the coldest thing Bird had ever seen. Perhaps the young lady would like to come out and explain where she got such fine footwear. She found them, Jacob said. His voice was hard as iron. On the trail. That's what she told me. Found them near a dead man, perhaps? She's 11 years old enough to hold a knife, old enough to know desperation. Drummond's smile widened. Old enough to kill. That's enough. Jacob's hand moved toward his hip, stopped. You got accusations to make, you make them to me. But you leave her alone. I'm not making accusations, just observations. But the law is the law. He turned to the sheriff. Don't you think this warrants investigation? The sheriff looked uncomfortable. I got to ask questions, Jacob. That's my job. Then ask me your questions and get off my land. I need to talk to the girl. No, Jacob. The sheriff's voice was tired. Don't make this harder than it has to be. There was movement in the second wagon. The third man stood up and Bird's blood turned to ice. She knew that face. Knew it from 8 months ago, from a fireplace in Nebraska, from slurred words about prices and bottles. Her father. Michael Chen climbed down from the wagon, unsteady on his feet, smelling of whiskey even from 50 feet away. He looked older than she remembered, more worn, face red and puffy, hands shaking. That's my daughter, Michael said, pointing at the house. Her and my son. I've come to take them home. Bird's vision went gray at the edges. Her legs wouldn't hold her. She sank down against the wall, River clutched against her chest, hand pressed over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Jacob had turned to face Michael, and even from here, Bird could see the rage in every line of his body. You sold them, Michael flinched. I was desperate. My wife had died. I didn't know what else to do. You knew exactly what you were doing. You took money from a child trafficker and walked away. I thought he'd give them a good home. Michael's voice broke, but Bird had heard her father's performances before, knew how he could cry on command when it served him. Soon as I heard what happened, I came looking. I got rights. I'm their legal father. Drummond stepped forward. That's correct. Mr. Chen has birth certificates, proof of paternity, and he's filed a claim with the court. Unless you have legal grounds for custody, Mr. Sterling, the children belong to their father. Over my dead body, that can be arranged. Drummond's voice went cold. But I'd advise cooperation. The law is on our side. We'll see about that. You have until tomorrow noon to produce the children. After that, we'll be forced to take more direct action. Drummond tipped his hat. Good day, Mr. Sterling. Think carefully about your next move. The wagons pulled away. Jacob stood on the porch watching them go until they disappeared around the bend, until the sound of wheels faded into silence. Then he came back inside. Bird was sitting on the floor where she'd collapsed, River in her lap, her whole body shaking. Jacob knelt in front of her. It's all right, we'll figure this out. He's my father, her voice came out broken. He sold us, and now he's back. I know, they'll make me go with him. They'll take River. No, Jacob's hands closed over hers. They won't, I promise you they won't. You can't promise that. She looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much, that knew better than to believe in promises. He's got papers. He's got the law. What have you got? Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood. I've got money, I've got land, and I've got friends. He pulled on his coat. I'm going to town, to see Ruth and the judge and whoever else I need to see. You stay here, lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me. What if they come back? They won't. Not yet. Drummond likes to do things legal, gives him cover. He'll wait till tomorrow like he said. And tomorrow we fight. After Jacob left, Bird couldn't sit still. She paced the house with River on her hip, checking windows, counting exits again, like she'd done that first night. Looking for ways out because running was what she knew. Running was what had kept her alive. But where would she run to? Winter was still fierce. She had no money, no food, no plan. And River was heavier now, harder to carry long distances. They wouldn't make it 3 days on the road. She was upstairs throwing things into her old pack when she heard a knock at the door. Her whole body froze. Jacob had said they wouldn't come back, had said to lock the doors. But the knock came again, softer this time, and a woman's voice. "Bird? Child, it's Ruth Morrison. Jacob sent me." Bird crept down the stairs, River in her arms, and peered through the window. It was Ruth alone, holding a basket like she had that first day. Bird unlocked the door. Ruth came in fast, closed the door behind her. She set the basket on the table and turned to Bird with fierce eyes. "Tell me everything. The truth. All of it. No lies. Why should I? Because Jacob's putting everything on the line for you. His reputation, his standing, maybe even his land. And I need to know if you're worth it." The bluntness shocked Bird into honesty. "What do you want to know?" "The boots, the dead man." "Did you kill him?" Bird lifted her chin. "Yes." "Why?" "Because he bought me. He was taking me to St. Louis to sell me to someone else. And because that night he came to the cage drunk and told me what he was going to do first. So I took his knife and I stuck it in his neck." Ruth's face didn't change. "How old were you?" 9. 9 years old. Ruth sat down heavily. "And your father?" "Sold us for $150 and 2 bottles of whiskey. And the baby? That's River. He's 10 months old. I've been taking care of him since Mama died. He's all I got." Ruth looked at River, then back at Bird. "That man who came with Drummond, that was your father?" "Yes, ma'am. You think he really wants you back?" "No, ma'am. I think he wants whatever Drummond's paying him." Ruth nodded slowly. "That's what Jacob thinks, too." She stood, went to the window. "Horace Drummond has been trying to get Jacob's land for 3 years. The water rights specifically. Railroad wants to run a line through here, and they need water access. Jacob won't sell. What's that got to do with us?" "Everything. If Drummond can discredit Jacob, force him to give up the children, or look like he's harboring a fugitive, Jacob loses standing with the community. Makes him vulnerable. Easier to pressure into selling. So we're just a way to get to him. You're a weapon, and Drummond's very good at using weapons." Ruth turned back to her. "But so am I, and I've been waiting 3 years for Horace to overreach." "What do you mean?" Ruth pulled a ledger from her basket. "I've been documenting every dirty deal, every bribe, every threat Horace Drummond has made since his son died." She paused. "You know about his son?" Bird shook her head. "Thomas Drummond. Died 5 years ago of tuberculosis. Could have been saved if they'd gotten him to Denver for treatment. Horace didn't have the cash ready. Asked Jacob for a loan. Jacob said no. Why? Because Jacob was barely holding on himself back then. And because the money he had was Sarah's inheritance, set aside for Emma, and he couldn't touch it. Couldn't even think about it." Ruth's voice softened, but Horace blamed him anyway. Watched his boy die and decided Jacob should pay for it. "So this is revenge." "Partly. Also profit. But mostly revenge." Ruth closed the ledger. "Which means he'll make mistakes. He already has. Paying your father using a child as a pawn, these things won't sit well with people once they know." "How will they know?" "Because tomorrow at the town meeting, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what Horace Drummond is." That night, Bird couldn't sleep. She sat by the window watching moonlight on snow. River asleep in the cradle beside her, the cradle Jacob had carved 12 years ago for a daughter who'd lived 3 days. The same cradle he'd let River use because, he'd said, Emma would have wanted it. She thought about her father stumbling drunk from that wagon, claiming he wanted them back. She knew better. Knew he'd sell them again the first chance he got. Knew the only thing he loved more than his children was whatever was in a bottle. And she thought about Jacob riding into town to call in favors, to find lawyers, to stand up in front of everyone and claim a girl who'd killed a man and a baby who wasn't his blood. Risking everything for children he'd known less than 2 weeks. Why would he do that? She knew the answer. Had known it since that conversation in the kitchen when he'd told her about Sarah and Emma. Because he'd lost his chance once and it had destroyed him. Because he'd spent 12 years locked behind closed doors and frozen grief. Because she and River were his second chance, and second chances didn't come around often. The door to the nursery was open now, she'd noticed. Not wide, just a crack, but open. She'd seen Jacob in there sometimes. sitting in the rocking chair, talking to ghosts, making peace maybe, making room. Morning came cold and bright. Jacob returned from town just after dawn, looking grim. He had papers in his hand, official-looking documents with seals and signatures. Judge Pierce agreed to an emergency hearing. This afternoon at 2. He sat at the table, spread the papers out. Drummond will argue that your father has parental rights. We'll argue that he forfeited those rights when he sold you. Will it work? I don't know. Depends on the judge. Depends on how good Drummond's lawyer is. Jacob looked up at her. I need you to tell the truth up there. All of it. About your father, about Hatch, about what happened. Can you do that? Tell them I killed a man. Tell them you defended yourself from a monster. There's a difference, Bird nodded slowly. What about after? If we lose, we won't lose. But if we do, then we'll figure something else out. But I'm not letting them take you, not without a fight. At 1:30 they rode into town. Bird in her new dress, the one Ruth had made her, blue calico with white buttons. River in the christening gown that had been Sarah's, saved for 12 years in tissue paper. Jacob in his best suit, the one he'd worn to Sarah's funeral and hadn't touched since. The town hall was packed, every seat taken, people standing in the back, pressed against walls. The whole town had turned out, some to support Jacob, some to support the law, some just to watch the spectacle. Drummond was already there, sitting at the front table with a lawyer in an expensive suit. Michael Chen sat beside them, looking miserable and small. When Bird walked in with Jacob, Michael's eyes found hers. He looked away quickly. Judge Harrison Pierce sat behind the raised bench, an older man with white hair and sharp eyes. He'd known Jacob 30 years, Ruth had said. Fair but strict. Wouldn't bend the law, but might interpret it favorably if given reason. The hearing began. Drummond's lawyer stood. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of parental rights. Michael Chen is the legal father of these children. He has birth certificates proving paternity. He has explained the unfortunate circumstances that led to their separation. But he is here now, sober and ready to resume his responsibilities. The law is clear. Children belong with their parents unless proven unfit. The lawyer was good, smooth, reasonable, making it sound like Michael was a grieving widower who'd made one mistake and deserved a second chance. Jacob's lawyer stood next, a man named Thornton from the next county over, best Ruth could find on short notice. Your Honor, the circumstances are not as simple as opposing counsel suggests. Michael Chen didn't lose his children. He sold them. Objection. Drummond's lawyer on his feet. There's no evidence of that. Hearsay from a child. The child in question is the victim. Her testimony is admissible. Judge Pierce nodded. I'll allow it. Young lady, please stand. Bird stood. Her legs were shaking, but she locked her knees, kept her back straight. State your name for the record. Sparrow Rose Chen. They call me Bird. How old are you? 11? Almost 12. Tell me what happened after your mother died. Bird told it, all of it. Her father leaving, coming back with Hatch. The money changing hands. The cage in the wagon. The other children, one shot dead for trying to run. Hatch coming for her that night, drunk and grabbing. The knife, her voice didn't shake, didn't break. She told it like a story that had happened to someone else, which in a way it had. That 9-year-old girl seemed like a different person now, someone smaller and more afraid. Someone who hadn't learned yet that you could walk 500 miles in boots that didn't fit if you had someone depending on you. When she finished, there was silence in the room. Then whispers, rustling, the sound of people shifting uncomfortably. Drummond's lawyer recovered first. A tragic story, but unverified. We have only the child's word for these events. We have more than that, Sheriff Aldridge stood. I received a telegram this morning from the Nebraska Marshal's office. He pulled out a paper. Michael Chen is wanted in Nebraska for child abandonment and suspected trafficking. Virgil Hatch was wanted in 3 territories for confirmed trafficking. Witnesses placed them together in Horse Creek in March of 1878. The dates matched the girl's story. The room erupted. Judge Pierce banged his gavel. Order. We will have order. Drummond was on his feet. Your Honor, this still doesn't address the central issue. The child killed a man, fled the scene. By her own admission, she's a fugitive. She was 9 years old, defending herself from a kidnapper and rapist. Jacob's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Are we really going to prosecute a child for surviving? The law doesn't make exceptions based on age. Yes, it does. It's called self-defense. Jacob stood, faced the room, faced Drummond. You want to talk about the law? Let's talk about it. That girl walked 500 miles to get away from a monster. She kept her baby brother alive through 8 months on the road with nothing but what she could scavenge and steal. She asked me to buy her because buying and selling was the only transaction she knew anymore. And you want to send her back to the man who sold her in the first place? The people were with him now. Bird could feel it, the shift in the room. Mr. Sterling, Judge Pierce's voice was measured. Do you wish to seek custody of these children? I do, Your Honor. On what grounds? On the grounds that they need a home and I have one. On the grounds that I can provide for them. On the grounds that Michael Chen forfeited his parental rights when he took money to give them to a trafficker. That's not how the law works, Drummond said. Parental rights don't just disappear because of one mistake. Ruth stood then. She'd been sitting in the back, waiting. May I approach, Your Honor? Judge Pierce looked surprised but nodded. Mrs. Morrison. Ruth walked to the front carrying a document. I have something relevant. Sarah Sterling's last will and testament. That was settled 12 years ago, Drummond said. The property settlement was... But there's a codicil that was never executed because the condition wasn't met. Until now. She handed the document to the judge. He read it, eyebrows rising. Then he read it aloud. I, Sarah Elizabeth Sterling, being of sound mind, do hereby add the following provision to my last will and testament. Should my husband Jacob Sterling take into his home and raise as his own any child or children, whether born of his blood or not, said child or children shall be considered legal heirs to all Sterling properties and holdings. Any child Jacob raises as his own is his own, in law and in spirit. The room went silent. This creates a legal framework for guardianship, Ruth said. If Jacob is raising these children, they have inheritance rights. That gives him standing to petition for custody. Drummond's face had gone white. That doesn't override parental rights. Perhaps not, but it establishes Jacob's legal interest. And given Mr. Chen's history, Judge Pierce looked at Michael. Stand up. Michael stood, swaying slightly. Do you want these children back? Michael opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Drummond, then at Bird. I don't know. Did Horace Drummond pay you to come here and claim them? Silence. Answer the question. Michael's face crumpled. $300. He said, if I claimed the kids, I'd get $300. The room erupted again. Drummond was on his feet, face red. That's a lie. He's drunk, Your Honor. You can't believe. I can smell the whiskey from here. Judge Pierce's voice was cold. Mr. Chen, do you wish to relinquish your parental rights? Michael looked at Bird one more time. She held his gaze, and for just a moment she saw something in his face that might have been regret, or might have been relief that someone else was taking the burden he'd never been able to carry. Yes, he said quietly. I do. They're better off with Mr. Sterling. Judge Pierce looked at Drummond. Did you pay this man to claim his children so you could use them as leverage against Jacob Sterling? I did no such thing, but his voice had lost its smoothness. I believe you did, and I believe this entire proceeding has been a sham designed to discredit a good man and force him off his land. Judge Pierce brought down his gavel. Michael Chen's parental rights are hereby terminated on grounds of abandonment and trafficking. Custody of Bird Chen and River Chen is awarded to Jacob Sterling, with adoption proceedings to follow. This court is adjourned. The room exploded in noise. People rushing forward, congratulating Jacob, glaring at Drummond. The sheriff was moving toward Drummond with a look that suggested arrest was coming. Michael Chen slipped out the side door and disappeared. Bird stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Jacob's hand came down on her shoulder, warm and solid. It's over. You're safe now. She looked up at him. Really? Really? You're mine now. Both of you. Legal and official. Bird felt something break open inside her chest. Something she'd been holding tight for so long it had calcified. Tears came hot and fast, and she couldn't stop them. Jacob pulled her close, and for the first time in her life, she let herself be held, let herself be weak, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found something permanent. That evening back at the ranch, after Ruth had left, After River was asleep, Jacob stood in the hallway looking at the nursery door. Bird stood beside him. "Want to open it?" she asked. He looked down at her. "Together?" "Together." He turned the knob and the door swung wide. Inside was exactly as he'd left it 12 years ago. The cradle by the window, the rocking chair, the small clothes folded in the chest. All of it preserved, frozen. But it didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a beginning. Jacob walked in and sat in the rocking chair. Bird followed, stood by the cradle, ran her fingers over the carved birds on the headboard. "She would have liked you," Jacob said. "Sarah, she would have loved that you are here." Bird looked at the empty room that wasn't empty anymore, at the man in the chair who wasn't frozen anymore. "I wish I could have met her." "Maybe you did. Maybe she's the reason you walked 500 miles and ended up here. Maybe she's been waiting for you the whole time." Bird smiled. "That's a nice thought. It's a true thought." They sat together in the nursery as darkness fell outside and snow began falling again, soft and gentle. And for the first time in 12 years, the door stayed open. For the first time in Bird's 11 years, she felt like she belonged somewhere, like she was home. The morning after the hearing, Bird woke to sunlight streaming through her window for the first time in weeks. Real sunlight, not the gray filtered light of storm days, but bright Montana winter sun that made the snow outside sparkle like crushed diamonds. She lay in bed for a moment, River sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside her, and let herself believe it was real. The hearing, the judge's ruling, the word that still felt strange and wonderful in her mouth. Sterling. She was Bird Sterling now. Legally, officially, permanently. Downstairs, she found Jacob already at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, legal documents, financial statements, letters with official seals. He looked up when she came in, and there was something different in his face. Not just tired, though he was that. Something lighter, like a weight had been lifted. "Morning," he pushed a cup of milk toward her. "Sleep all right? Better than I have in months." She sat down, looked at the papers. "What's all this?" "Adoption paperwork. Final documents for the judge. Financial disclosures, character references, property transfers." He paused, making sure everything's legal and proper, so no one can ever challenge it. Bird touched one of the documents, saw her name written there in formal script. Bird Chen, to be known hereafter as Bird Sterling, legal daughter and heir. The words blurred slightly and she blinked hard. "It's really happening. It's really happening. 2 weeks, maybe 3, and it'll be completely final." He gathered the papers carefully. "I'm taking these to town this morning. Judge Pierce wants everything filed before he leaves for the territorial capital." "Can I come?" "Better if you stay here. Drummond's still around, still angry. I don't want him getting any ideas about causing more trouble." Bird nodded, understanding. She'd seen Drummond's face when the judge ruled against him, seen the fury there barely controlled. Men like that didn't forget humiliation. After Jacob left, the house felt too quiet. Bird tried to read, tried to practice her letters, but couldn't settle. She kept looking out the window, watching the road, waiting. River sensed her unease and fussed, needing extra attention, extra reassurance. By noon, she was pacing. By 1, she was standing at the window every 5 minutes. By 2, she was seriously considering saddling a horse and riding to town herself, though she barely knew how to ride. At 2:30, a wagon came up the road. Not Jacob's, a smaller buggy, moving fast. Ruth. Bird met her at the door. Ruth's face was flushed, whether from cold or urgency, Bird couldn't tell. "Is Jacob back yet?" "No, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, everything's fine." Ruth came inside, set down her basket. "But there's something you should know, about Horace Drummond." "What about him?" "He's been arrested this morning. Sheriff took him into custody on charges of fraud, bribery, and conspiracy." Bird felt her knees go weak. "Arrested?" Ruth nodded, satisfaction clear in her face. "All those records I kept, all that documentation. I gave it to Judge Pierce yesterday after the hearing. He reviewed it overnight and issued a warrant first thing this morning. So he's in jail?" "He's in jail, and likely to stay there for a good long while." Ruth smiled. "You're safe now, child. Truly safe. No more threats, no more schemes. Horace Drummond can't hurt you anymore. But something in Bird's chest didn't ease. She thought about Drummond's face, about the cold calculation in those eyes. Men like that always had one more move, one more card to play. Where's Jacob now? At the courthouse, filing papers. He should be back within the hour. Ruth pulled food from her basket. I brought lunch. Figured you might be too nervous to cook. They ate together, Ruth chattering about town gossip, about the scandal of Drummond's arrest, about how everyone was talking about Jacob and the children he had saved. But Bird only half listened. Something felt unfinished, unresolved. Jacob returned just before 3, looking grim. Bird met him at the door. You heard about Drummond? I heard. He hung up his coat slowly. I also went to see him. You what? Bird and Ruth spoke simultaneously. Jacob looked between them. I went to the jail, asked to speak with him. Why would you do that? Bird couldn't understand it. The man had tried to destroy them, had used her father as a weapon, had threatened everything they were building. Because I needed to understand why. Jacob sat heavily at the table. 12 years he's hated me. 12 years of trying to take my land, undermine my business, turn people against me. I needed to know what I did to deserve that. What did he say? Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he told them. Drummond had a son, Thomas, 22 years old 5 years ago, got sick with tuberculosis, the kind that could be treated if you caught it early enough, if you had money for the specialists in Denver. Drummond didn't have the cash ready. His money was tied up in investments, in land deals, in the bank's reserves. So he came to Jacob, asked for a loan, $2,000, offered Jacob's own water rights as collateral, temporary security until he could liquidate other assets. And you said no, Bird said quietly, understanding now. I said no, Jacob's voice was rough, because I didn't have $2,000 either. Not liquid. The ranch was struggling, cattle prices were down. I just spent everything I had on new breeding stock. The only money I had was Sarah's inheritance, kept separate, untouchable. I couldn't. His voice broke. It was for Emma. Even though Emma was dead, I couldn't touch money meant for her. Ruth reached across the table, took his hand. Thomas Drummond died 6 weeks later. Could have been saved if they'd gotten him to Denver in time. Horace blamed me. Watched his son die knowing that $2,000 would have made the difference. And I had it, locked away for a ghost. That wasn't your fault, Bird said fiercely. You didn't make his son sick. You didn't owe him that money. I know. Jacob looked at her. But I understand his anger now. I understand why he wanted to destroy me. Because I've spent 12 years destroying myself over Sarah and Emma. Grief makes you crazy, makes you cruel, makes you hurt people who don't deserve it. What did you tell Tim? I told him I was sorry. Sorry about Thomas. Sorry I couldn't help. Sorry that we both wasted years being angry and closed off when we could have been healing. He paused, and I told him I forgave him for everything he tried to do to us. Did he forgive you? I don't know, but I needed to say it anyway, needed to let it go. Jacob squeezed Ruth's hand, then released it. I've spent 12 years locked behind closed doors. I'm done with that. Done with grief that turns into poison. Done with holding on to pain like it's the only thing keeping me alive. Bird understood then. This wasn't just about Drummond. It wasn't Joe. This was about Jacob, finally, truly letting go of the weight he'd carried since Sarah died. Opening not just the nursery door, but all the doors he'd sealed shut. Later that evening, after Ruth had gone home and River was asleep, Bird found Jacob in the parlor staring at the fire. She sat beside him on the floor, leaning against his chair the way she'd learned she could now, the way family did. Papa? Thank you for forgiving him. Even though he tried to hurt us, Jacob's hand came down to rest on her head, gentle. That's what family does. We forgive. We move forward. We don't let the past poison the future. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching flames dance. Then Bird asked the question that had been building since the hearing. When will it be final? The adoption? Judge said 2 to 3 weeks. There's a formal ceremony, paperwork to file with the territorial government, waiting periods for any objections. Will there be objections? I don't think so. Not anymore. Drummond was the only real threat and he's locked up. Your father signed away his rights. Victoria Hatch dropped her claim. Jacob looked down at her. You're stuck with me now. Bird smiled. Good. I like being stuck. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparations. Ruth came daily with fabric and thread, sewing new dresses for Bird, a proper suit for River's ceremony. Jacob worked with his lawyer, ensuring every document was perfect, every legal requirement met. The town buzzed with anticipation. The Sterling adoption had become the story of the season, the tragic widower finding family again, the orphaned children finding home. Bird tried not to think about it too much, tried not to let hope build too high because hope had always been the thing that hurt most when it was taken away. But despite herself, she felt it growing, felt herself believing in permanence, in futures, in belonging. She spent her days learning. Jacob taught her the ranch business in earnest now, showing her account books, explaining profit margins, discussing breeding strategies and market prices. You need to know this, he said again and again. This will be yours someday. You and River. You need to know how to run it. He taught her practical skills too. How to ride properly, not just sit on a horse, but truly ride, controlling the animal with subtle shifts of weight and pressure. How to shoot, starting with targets on fence posts, teaching her to breathe and squeeze rather than pull. How to read weather in the skates, how to judge cattle health by eye, how to fix a fence and shoe a horse, and 100 other things a rancher needed to know. Bird absorbed it all hungrily. This was belonging in action, being given knowledge and skills that said you're staying, you're part of this, you matter. At school, things improved too. The whispers about the killer girl faded as new stories replaced old scandals. Emma became a true friend, inviting Bird to her house after school, sharing books and secrets the way girls do. Other children followed Emma's lead, and soon Bird found herself part of a group, accepted not despite her past, but as herself. On Sundays, they went to church as a family. Jacob, Bird, River, sometimes Ruth. People greeted them warmly now. Mr. Sterling, Miss Bird, they'd say, nodding respect. The Sterlings, as if it had always been that way, as if they'd always belonged together. 2 weeks after the hearing, Jacob called Bird into his study after dinner. He had papers spread across his desk, legal documents with red seals. Tomorrow's the ceremony, final adoption hearing, Judge Pierce presiding. He looked at her carefully. Are you ready? Bird's heart hammered. Tomorrow, 24 hours, and it would be irrevocable, permanent, real beyond any possibility of change. I'm ready. Good, because I am too. Jacob stood, crossed to a cabinet, pulled out a wooden box she'd never seen before. I have something for you, for both of you. He opened the box. Inside were two things, a photograph and a silver frame showing Sarah and Emma, the same image that hung in the hall, but this one was clearly meant to be held, to be kept close, and a document, old and yellowed, with Sarah's handwriting across the top. This is Sarah's will, the original, with the codicil that Ruth kept safe all these years. Jacob handed it to Bird. I want you to read it. The part about children. Bird read slowly, sounding out the formal legal language. Should my husband Jacob Sterling take into his home and raise as his own any child or children, whether born of his blood or not, said child or children shall be considered legal heirs to all Sterling properties and holdings. She looked up. I don't understand. Why did she write this? Because Sarah knew. Jacob's voice was thick with emotion. She knew she might not make it. Knew even if she did, we might not have more children. So she made sure that if I ever found children to love, they'd be protected. Legally mine. Legally hers, even though she never met you. Bird traced the words with her finger. She wanted you to have a family, even if it wasn't the family you planned. She wanted me to love again, to open my heart again, to not spend my life locked away grieving. Jacob took the document back gently, and she made it possible, made it legal, made it so that when I found you in the snow asking if I could buy you, I could say yes, not with money, but with everything else, with name and home and future. Bird felt tears on her cheeks. She would have liked us. She would have loved you. Both of you, of that I have no doubt. Jacob handed her the photograph then. This is for you, to keep. So you know where you come from, what family you're part of. Sarah and Emma, they're part of your story now, part of your history. Bird took the frame carefully, looked at Sarah's face. Thank you. she whispered. Tomorrow at the ceremony, you and River will officially become Sterlings. My children, Sarah's children, heirs to everything we built. Jacob knelt down so he was eye level with her. But you're already my daughter. Have been since the day you walked into this house. The ceremony just makes it legal. Makes it so no one can ever take you away. Bird hugged him then, fierce and tight, the photograph pressed between them. I love you, Papa. I love you too, little bird. More than I knew I could love anyone again. The adoption ceremony was set for 2 o'clock at the courthouse. By noon, half the town had gathered. Ruth had organized everything, flowers and ribbons, and enough food to feed an army. This wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a celebration. Bird wore her finest dress, deep blue wool that Ruth had spent 2 weeks perfecting. River wore a little suit with a white shirt and tiny suspenders. Jacob wore his wedding suit, brushed and pressed, the one he hadn't worn since Sarah's funeral. They arrived at 1:30 to find the courthouse steps packed with people. Mrs. Patterson from the general store, Doc Hensley with his wife, Pastor Webb and most of the congregation, the school teacher, Miss Johnson, Emma and her family. Faces Bird recognized from church, from town, from the community that was becoming hers. Inside, Judge Pierce waited at the bench. The formal courtroom had been transformed, flowers on every surface, benches packed with witnesses. This was more than a legal procedure. This was the town welcoming them, accepting them, saying you belong here now. The judge called them forward. Jacob, Bird, and River stood before him. Ruth stood beside them as witness and family friend. We are gathered today, Judge Pierce began, his voice formal but warm, to finalize the adoption of 2 children into the Sterling family. This is not a decision made lightly or quickly. It is a commitment that binds not just today, but for all time. He looked at Jacob. Mr. Sterling, you petitioned to adopt Bird Chen and River Chen as your legal children, with all rights and responsibilities pertaining thereto. Do you understand the weight of this commitment? I do, Your Honor. You commit to provide for them materially, emotionally, and spiritually, to raise them as your own, to give them your name, to make them heirs to everything you possess. Do you so commit? I do, Judge Pierce turned to Bird. Young lady, do you understand what's happening here today? Yes, sir. Bird's voice was clear and strong. This man wishes to become your legal father, to give you his name, his home, his protection. Do you accept this? Bird looked up at Jacob, saw the man who'd turned around in the snow, who'd opened his locked doors, who'd fought for her when he didn't have to. Yes, sir. I accept. The judge smiled. Then by the power vested in me by Montana Territory, I declare this adoption final and legal. From this day forward, you are Bird Sterling and River Sterling, lawful children of Jacob Matthew Sterling, with all rights, privileges, and protections under the law. He brought down his gavel once, sharp and final. Congratulations. You're a family. The courthouse erupted in applause. People surged forward, shaking Jacob's hand, hugging Bird, exclaiming over River. Ruth was crying openly, not bothering to hide it. Doc Hensley clapped Jacob on the back. Pastor Webb offered a blessing. Mrs. Patterson pressed cookies into Bird's hands. Outside, the celebration continued. Someone had brought a fiddle, someone else a guitar. Music filled the cold air. Children ran between adults, laughing. Food appeared on makeshift tables. The whole town turned out to celebrate the Sterling family's new beginning. Bird found herself pulled into a hug by Emma. We're practically sisters now, Emma said. Both daughters of rich ranchers. Both in the same family, kind of. Bird laughed. I never had a sister before. Well, you do now. Emma linked arms with her. Come on, let's get some of that cake before the boys eat it all. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow, Jacob found Bird standing slightly apart from the crowd, holding River, watching everything with wondering eyes. Overwhelmed? A little. She looked up at him. Is it always like this? Is what always like this? Family, community, people being happy for you? Jacob thought about that. When it's real, when it's right, yes. This is what it looks like when people care about each other, when they celebrate the good things. I've never had this before. Neither have I. Not in 12 years. Jacob put his arm around her shoulders. We're learning together. They stood that way for a while, father and daughter, watching their community celebrate their family. Then Ruth called them back for photographs, for toasts, for more food and more well wishes and more of everything that made this day perfect. As they rode home in the wagon, darkness falling around them and stars beginning to appear, Bird felt something settle in her chest. A certainty, a peace. This was real. This was permanent. This was home. Papa? Hmm? Thank you for turning around that day. In the snow. When I asked if you could buy us? Jacob was quiet for a moment. Thank you for asking, for giving me a reason to turn around. They pulled up to the house, lights glowing warm in the windows, smoke rising from the chimney. Jacob helped Bird down with River in her arms, and together they walked toward the door. Before they went inside, Bird stopped, looked back at the cottonwood tree on the rise, barely visible in the darkness. Can we do something tomorrow? Something important? What's that? The boots. The old ones. I want to bury them. Under the tree with Sarah and Emma. If that's okay? Jacob's voice was thick when he answered. That's more than okay. That's perfect. The next morning dawned clear and cold. They walked up to the cottonwood together. Jacob carrying a shovel, Bird carrying the old boots wrapped in cloth, Ruth carrying River because Bird needed her hands free. Under the tree were two graves marked with simple stones. Sarah Elizabeth Sterling, 1848 to 1866. Emma Grace Sterling, December 36, 1866. The dates that had defined Jacob's grief, that had shaped 12 years of his life. Jacob dug a small hole beside the graves, not deep, just enough to hold what needed holding. Bird knelt and unwrapped the boots, these boots that had carried her 500 miles, that had kept her standing when standing was all she could manage. She placed them in the hole gently. These got me here, she said quietly, speaking to Sarah and Emma and anyone listening. These got me home. Thank you for the journey. Thank you for keeping me safe. She paused. You can rest now. We all can. She covered them with her own hands, patting earth down carefully. Jacob placed a small marker he had made, a flat stone with words burned into wood beneath. The boots that walked 500 miles, 1878. Ruth said a prayer in her gentle way, asking blessings on the living and peace for the dead. River babbled happily, not understanding but feeling the solemnity somehow. Then Bird spoke again, surprising herself with words that came from somewhere deep. Mama, if you can hear me, I found the place you wanted for us. I found a good man. River's safe, I'm safe. We have a home now, a real one, the kind you always wanted us to have. She turned slightly toward the other graves, and Sarah, thank you for leaving room for us in your will and in your husband's heart. Thank you for knowing he'd need someone to love again. We're taking care of him. And he's taking care of us. I think that's what you wanted. The wind moved through bare branches, making sounds like whispers, like approval, like family welcoming family. Jacob spoke then, his voice rough but strong. Sarah, I kept my promise. Took me 12 years, but I did it. I'm loving again. I'm living again. Thank you for the will, for the permission, for knowing what I'd need even when I didn't know myself. He paused, looked down at Bird and River. And Emma, if you're listening, these are your brother and sister now. I hope that makes you happy. I hope wherever you are, you're at peace knowing your papa found his way back to living. They stood together for a long moment, 4 living people and 3 dead, all of them connected by love and loss and the strange paths that make families from unlikely pieces. Then they walked back to the house together. Bird between Jacob and Ruth, River in Ruth's arms, all of them touching, all of them connected, and all of them family. That afternoon, while River napped and Ruth baked bread in the kitchen, Bird sat at the table with her journal. Jacob had given it to her the day after the adoption, leather-bound with thick, creamy pages, and told her to write whatever she wanted. She thought for a long time about what to write, pen hovering over blank paper. Then she began. My name is Bird Sterling. I'm 11 years old, almost 12. I used to be Bird Chen, but that was someone else, someone who didn't have a home. I walked 500 miles to get here. I walked in boots that didn't fit, carrying my brother, running from monsters. I was so tired, so scared, so sure I'd never find anywhere safe. But I met a man in the snow. And I asked him a question I'd learned to ask. Can you buy us, mister? And he said no, not with money, but he bought us anyway, with kindness and patience and love. He bought us with the parts of himself he'd locked away for 12 years. He gave us his name. He gave us his home. He gave us a future. And he asked for nothing except that we stay, that we let him love us, that we be the family he'd lost. I used to think love was a transaction, that everything had a price. But Papa Jacob taught me different. Love isn't buying or selling. Love is opening doors you thought would stay closed forever. Love is turning around in the snow when you could have walked away. Love is fighting for someone when no one expects you to. We chose each other. And that choice is stronger than blood, stronger than law, stronger than anything. Mama used to say every winter's hard, but Papa Jacob says they end. And when they do, you see what survived, what grew stronger in the cold. We survived, and now we're growing. This is my family. This is my home. This is my name. I am Bird Sterling, and I am free. She closed the journal and looked up to find Jacob in the doorway, watching her with soft eyes. Writing something important? Just our story. That is important. He came into the room, sat across from her. Can I read it someday? Someday when it's finished. When will it be finished? Bird smiled. Never, because families keep making stories. Every day is a new chapter. Jacob smiled back, the kind of smile that transformed his face, that made him look younger and lighter and freed from weight. That's a beautiful thought. They went inside as dusk fell. River laughed at something only babies understand. Jacob made coffee while Bird set the table. Ruth had left a pot of stew warming on the stove. They ate together, River in his high chair between them, the warm kitchen filled with the smell of stew and fresh bread. What do you think happens next? Bird asked, breaking a piece of bread. Whatever we make happen. Jacob looked at her across the table. The story isn't written yet. We get to write it ourselves. What do you want to write? Long, happy chapters, teaching you everything I know, watching River grow up, building something that lasts for generations. He paused. What do you want? I want to learn everything. I want to make you proud. I want River to grow up safe and loved. I want to be the kind of daughter Sarah would have been proud of. You already are. River banged his spoon on the table, making them both laugh. After dinner, Bird read to River while Jacob cleaned dishes. Normal, domestic, family. At bedtime, Jacob came to Bird's room to say goodnight, something he'd started doing after the adoption became official. He sat on the edge of her bed while she tucked River into his cradle. Sleep well, little bird. Papa, can I ask you something? Always. Do you think Mama and Sarah and Emma can see us? Know we're together? Jacob considered that seriously. I don't know if they can see us exactly, but I believe they know. I believe love doesn't end just because life does. And I believe they're happy we found each other. Bird smiled. I like that. Me too. Jacob kissed her forehead, then River's. Good night, children. Good night, Papa. After he left, Bird lay in the darkness listening to River's breathing, to the house settling, to wind moving through cottonwood branches up the hill. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, about every painful step and desperate moment and time she'd wanted to give up. Worth it. All of it was worth it to be here now. She thought about the boots buried under the tree, about the miles they'd carried her, about how strange it was that instruments of survival had led her to a place where she didn't need to survive anymore, where she could simply live. She thought about Jacob, alone for 12 years, locked away with his grief, and how much courage it must have taken to turn around that day, to open his door, to let himself love again. And she thought about Sarah, dying but still thinking ahead, still making provisions for a future she'd never see, still loving her husband enough to give him permission to move on. All of it, every piece, had led to this moment, to this room, to this family. Bird drifted toward sleep with a smile on her face, feeling safe in a way she'd never felt before, feeling loved in a way she'd thought was only for other people, feeling home in a way that went bone deep. In his own room down the hall, Jacob sat at his desk writing in his journal, something he hadn't done in years, but Ruth had suggested it might help him process everything that had changed. He wrote about finding Bird and River in the snow, about the choice he'd made to turn around, about how that choice had saved them all. He wrote about opening the nursery, about forgiving Drummond, about learning to live again after 12 years of barely existing. And he wrote about Sarah, thanking her for the will, for the foresight, for knowing what he would need before he knew himself. "Thank you for loving me enough to let me love again," he wrote. "Thank you for Bird and River. Thank you for giving me back my life." He closed the journal and looked at the photograph on his desk. Sarah and Emma, smiling out at him from the past. He touched the frame gently. "They're wonderful," he whispered. "You would love them so much. I hope you can see us. See how we're healing each other. I hope you're at peace." The next morning, Bird woke early and went to the kitchen to find Jacob already there. Coffee brewing, breakfast started. It was Sunday, church day, the day the Sterling family would attend together as always now. But first, before the day began properly, Bird did something she'd been planning. She took a piece of paper and wrote carefully in her improving hand, "The Sterling family, Jacob Sterling, father Bird Sterling, daughter River Sterling, son founded December 15th, 1878, the day a question was asked in the snow, the day a door was opened, the day a family was born." She showed it to Jacob. "Can we frame this? Hang it somewhere?" Jacob read it, eyes growing wet. "Yes." He pulled her into a hug. "Yes, we can frame it. Put it right in the parlor where everyone can see." That afternoon after church, Ruth helped them hang it over the mantel. The Sterling family proclaimed to anyone who entered, proclaimed to themselves, proclaimed to the world. This was who they were now. This was what they'd built from snow and grief and 500 miles of walking and 12 years of locked doors. A family. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and strong and permanent. That evening, as the sun set in shades of gold and rose, they gathered on the porch one more time, looking out at land that stretched to the horizon, at the cottonwoods standing sentinel on the hill, at the vast Montana sky. Bird leaned against Jacob, River between them, and felt something she'd never felt before. Not just safety, not just home, but certainty. The bone-deep knowledge that this was permanent, that nothing would take it away, that she would grow up here and someday be old here and always, always belong. "Thank you," she whispered, "to everyone and no one, to the universe that had led her here, to the man who'd turned around, to the woman who'd planned for this moment from beyond death. Thank you for bringing me home." Jacob's arm tightened around her. "Thank you for letting me be your father." River made his happy sound, the one that meant he was content and safe and loved. And in that moment, as stars began appearing in the darkening sky, as the first snow of evening began falling soft and gentle, the Sterling family stood together, complete, healed, home. Not because of blood or law or transaction, but because of choice, because of love freely given and gratefully accepted, because of doors opened and journeys completed and families made from the most unlikely materials. Bird Sterling had walked 500 miles in boots that didn't fit to stand on this porch with her father and her brother and her future, and it was worth every step.